In this next module, we will look at evaluating findings and reporting your audit results. So this is a part of the due stage as well. So nonconformities. First of all, let's look at the definition. What is a nonconformity? The nonconformity is defined as a non-fulfillment of a requirement. Okay, so the organization is supposed to do XYZ, and there's XYZ is the requirement, and you're auditing against, work instruction 0023, which is the criteria. And what you find is they're doing A, but not B, they're doing C, so there's a gap. The procedure says, or work instruction says do ABC, they're only doing A and C. So it's a non-fulfillment of a requirement. Auditors should report audit results as observations, and then they have to identify which observations that are being considered non-conforming. So in 19,011, this will show as being kind of the grade, if you will, your audit grade. And in most cases, it's up to you how you go about doing your grading, and I'll talk a bit about that here in a minute. Systematic problems. So systematic problems are typically where you have major nonconformities. They're usually documented as a nonconformance. However, isolated occurrences may constitute an opportunity for improvement or a near miss, or sometimes even a minor nonconformity. This is dependent on the impact to the overall company or system. In some cases, nonconformities can be broken down as major or minor. You could even have concerns. They're not necessarily a nonconformity. But that's the grading piece. Other audit findings might be, especially for those that don't really fit into the nonconformities category, as a general rule is to report these findings in a formal report. Observations may be useful as a concern that's revisited during subsequent audits. So a concern, I typically use concern or system weakness. So a concern or system weakness for something that I usually call this like a C- in the grading scale. So this is something that's not quite out of bounds yet, but it's not looking good, and it's something that needs to be addressed. Observations help to present a balanced summary of both good and bad. So think about your observations as kind of the umbrella word for everything that you've collected. It's the bundle of findings, and then you classify those. Observations are a starting point for improvement or risk reduction. And keep in mind, this is where I think a lot of people miss the mark. You're not auditing to show evidence that you're doing audits, even though that's a requirement in the standard. So for compliance sake, yes, you are, but that's an indirect value. The direct value is that you're auditing so you could find opportunities for improvement or opportunities to reduce risk. You want to find things before an external party does, specifically your certification body. But more importantly than that is your customer. Your customer should not be the recipient of your mistakes. Okay, so you want to be able to find those things on your own, have a good, robust system internally, and the audit findings and observations are meant to be the starting point for action. Okay, so think about it as you're checking your system and bringing back observations so that you can take action. It's a more informed actions. Okay, that's the way I look at observations from audits. They're often reported as corrective action requests or CARs. That's kind of a level 1, or preventive action. Preventive action requests or PARs is a level 2. Complaint is a level 3. Opportunities for improvement, or OFIs, as you see it here, level 4. Or sorry, let me go back. This is compliant, not complaint. Should be compliant, which is neutral opportunities for improvement as ways to get better, and best practices as a level 5. So this is a benchmark that you want to study and roll out to other areas. But there isn't anything in 19,011 that says you have to use these. This is just examples of ways that observations are reported. So what we recommend is defining classifications of finding in your internal audit procedure and actually documenting that out. How are you going to grade these things? Which observations become subcategories, because those subcategories then prompt different classifications of actions that you want to take. Okay. Time should be allowed within the audit schedule to review significant observations. It's a good practice, especially if you're doing a multi-day audit, to do a review at the end of each day. It also enables the auditor to confirm that all audit objectives are being met, the audit's on or off scheduled pace, and make adjustments as needed for this one. Detect any errors, omissions, or understandings, so that you can get those reconciled before finalizing your audit report. This saves time in the final preparation before the closing meeting and avoids repeat findings by consolidation. So if you have an issue, let's say with key documentation that's being used that's out of date, and systematically there are 5 different areas where people are using old procedures, and that's leading to sending product out of spec, or working out of process and causing the company money, something like that. If you can get together and review the findings, you can consolidate those instead of having each auditor in each area write a separate nonconformity. If you can be more concise and pull the one-offs into a systematic reporting, that's better. You could also say, okay, this is systematic. It's not just a one-off. It's not just in 1 or 2 areas. This is across the board. The company really needs to address how revision control or updates to documentation gets rolled out, how employees are taught about the latest and greatest procedure or whatever. That is oftentimes really important, because you don't want to just be pumping out audit observations and findings just for the sake of it. You want to be able to highlight a few key issues that, if addressed, will make the company better. Okay, and finally, this enables a big picture view of trends, systematic issues, etc. So you can have minor or major nonconformities. Let's look at major. So it's the absence or total breakdown of a system to meet a requirement. So it's happening across the board. Multiple minor nonconformances observed in the same process can represent a systemic breakdown. Let's be considered a major. Any noncompliance resulting in the probable delivery of a nonconformance. So our issue with Josh, we can say, look, if you're using blue labels when you should be using red scrap labels, if you're using good product labels to ship, or good product labels and placing them on bad product, experience in your own observation is showing that that's leading to the probable delivery of nonconformance. That's a major issue. Another item is conditions that may result in failure or materially reduce usability of products or services versus their intended purpose. And then a noncompliance that judgment and experience indicates is likely to either result in a system failure or materially reduce its ability to assure controlled processes and products. On the minor front, minor nonconformity, an observation that judgment and experience indicate is not likely to result in a management system failure, reduce its ability to ensure controlled processes or product. It's a finding that's either a failure in some small portion of the system or an isolated incident. It's highly unlikely to result in the delivery of a nonconformance. You have other controls there to catch that nonconformity, so it's more of a nuisance, or internal cost or poor quality cost rather than something that's going to get out to the customer. And 9001, for an example, does not require that classification. Okay? It doesn't require major versus minor. Now, I think it's a good idea, if all else fails, to use the classification grading system or whatever you want to call it that your certification body auditor uses or your key customers use. If you could get in sync with that, I think that's always a good practice. If all else fails, use your certification bodies as a template. That'll get you used to kind of processing things the same way that they do. Nonconformance statement. So what is a nonconformity statement? It's a record of evidence used as the basis for the audit, so there's nothing in the conclusion that cannot be substantiated by the recipient. So in other words, this is something that can be followed. The statement is something where you can hand that statement over to the auditee or the audit client. They can take that statement and see for themselves that that statement is true. Information to leadership concerning the organization's systems and how it complies with or fails to comply with requirements. It's a starting point ultimately for the action by the auditee for improvement. State the requirement, your observation compared to the requirement, supporting objective evidence and the nature of the observation. Connect your observation to business impact where possible. That's a little bit wordy, so I'm going to take you to the next slide that kind of breaks that down. Actually, it's in a slide or two coming up here, but writing a nonconformity statement. It's not a criticism of an individual or auditee's system or processes. And no one likes being a bad report, so you must expect to be challenged if there are any errors in the nonconformity statement. So make sure that your nonconformity statement is concise because you probably will be challenged. Remember these 4 elements. This is what kind of helps to summarize this tip that's given down here on the last slide. So where did the requirement come from? What did the requirement state? So that's kind of, sentence number 1. Sentence number 2, where the audit finding was observed and what was the observation or what was observed. All 4 elements must be included in the nonconformity statement to clearly communicate a starting point. Now, I want to point this out just because we're talking about standards. From best practices, I look at this as if you can't get at least these 4 elements together in your nonconformity statement, you need to look at it again because it may be ready to be challenged, and you don't want that. You want something concise that's a statement of fact that can be substantiated by going and looking at your evidence and walking the audit trail. And if there are 5 of us that walk that trail based on your statement, we would find the same thing. That's what we want. So keep these 4 in mind. The first 2 again are the requirement. So that's the criteria in which you're auditing against. And then the second part of this is the observation. But in addition to the written nonconformance statement, be open, honest, and straightforward. Don't hide the findings until the end of the audit. I don't like that. The auditee is not going to like that. When possible, clarify and confirm your findings immediately. Make certain that you have documented the details of your findings before leaving the area that you've audited. Sometimes you might have to circle back and go back to that area in order to clarify some things. But the idea is make sure you document, you want what was the part number, what was the lot number, what was the tool number, who did you talk to, just as much of the facts that you can get documented before you leave the area as possible. Review your observations with the auditee and or local supervision. Your best ally during a closing meeting or writing an audit report is the process owner or the people in that area that also observed what you observed, so the auditee and the auditors are aligned. You want that alignment. Don't leave the writing of the nonconformity statement and the details of the associated objective evidence until the end of the audit, because, then you'll be just guessing at who you talked to and what was the product ID number and what was the batch number and all that stuff. What was what was that gauge ID number? So make sure you're kind of collecting those things as you go. And this is something that I find all the time, irrespective of how much time you've allowed to prepare for the closing meeting, you'll find there's never enough time. Wi-Fi goes out, your computer needs to reboot, you ran out of ink in your pen, or there's always something that seems to get in the way. So, get a little bit comfortable with that time crunch that you're always going to have in preparing for the closing meeting. You have to sell your audit findings. This is something that a lot of people don't do, and I've been encouraging our students and customers for years to do this, especially if you're an internal auditor. You got a finding, but you have to connect that to something. Okay, you've got to connect your finding to actual or potential safety risk, customer dissatisfaction, cost of poor quality, impacts to the business plan, a reduction in waste and variation, environmental and social impacts. Ultimately opportunities to save money tends to kind of perk up the ears, because that's a really kind of short-term and tangible win for the company or tangible benefit. But make sure you're connecting what you find in your observations to one or more of these elements here. So writing a nonconformity, there's another exercise to do. So in your audit teams, going back to the 2 teams that you had in the breakout session with Josh, in your audit teams, write a nonconformity statement for each of the nonconformities that were discovered during the partial audit. So in that partial audit, you had at least 2 findings that you had. So determine if the nonconformity is a major or minor. Is it a concern, opportunity for improvement? Is it a risk? How would you grade or classify that finding? Present your nonconformity statement to top management. So for this, your material that's going to be needed would be audit report or the corrective action request template. Okay. Or, audit findings template or NCR or whatever. But the idea is, I recommend even creating a little template that helps you write out the nonconformity statement the correct way. If you need an audit report or corrective action request template, it'll be in the classroom, or you can search on our website and get some templates there. So what are the contents of a formal auditing report? First of all, introduction. And this is when you're doing a formal report, typically with larger multiple process audits, or maybe a full system audit, or a gap assessment, or a re-registration, or even a surveillance audit. But this is something that's really formal. So you may not be this formal when you're doing just a one-off process. But introduction, this is the purpose and the audit scope. The auditee, the client and auditing organization, the audit team members, audit dates, the standards that you use, auditee personnel involved in the audit, a list of recipients of the report, a summary. This is the statement of the findings, a general statement about the auditee's overall compliance with the applicable standard, and the suitability and effectiveness of the system. Moving on, you want to itemize results like the findings and any associated tracking number like NCR1, NCR2, or CAR1, CAR2, OFI1, OFI2, whatever. Corrective action request details like due dates, etc. Your nonconformity statement. So this is really kind of the nuts and bolts, the key information of the report. You want a record of the opening meeting, like attendance or sign-in sheet, closing meeting attendance and sign-in sheet there. you'll find more tools and templates in the ISO 19011 course. So this lead auditor course that we have has templates laid out where you can just plug and play most of these exercises and most of these documentation requirements as a part of your auditing. So I encourage you, if you haven't already, check out this course. We also have several tools and templates that you can buy on their own or download free. Some of them are free online. So, but this course really lays out. We have what's called the ultimate audit checklist and report that's like 30 pages long that has a template for 80 plus pages of requirements or 80 plus pages of guidance in the 19,011 standard to guide and help with audit, with your audit program, that sort of thing. So check that out and let me know if you need more information about that. Other issues to consider in your report, because ultimately you want findings that are worth reporting. So you want to connect the finding to key process indicators, KPIs or PPIs. Sometimes, we will call them process performance indicators, but KPIs are kind of the high level objectives and targets when you can. So what you're finding is connected specifically to, metrics for parts per million customer complaints or number of dollars rejected or whatever it is. So you want to make that connection. Define a clear business case for addressing the findings. Who wants to leave a gap if that gap is resulting in tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost revenue every month? Define and discuss how to document your observations so that process owners and other respondents understand. So this is something that I do on a regular basis, and it's a great practice. How can I write this in a way that represents the reality of what the truth is? Here's the observation that I have, but how can I write that so that it's written in the best way for you and your team to take action? How can I make it really clear so that the corrective action phase, which is the second part of all of this, or the improvement phase, whatever you want to call it, the action side of doing audits. So you've got the find it, which is auditing, and the fix it side. How can you write the find it side, to present the observation so that you can take that observation and take action and fix whatever is broken or could be improved. You have to record objective evidence to support your conclusion. And that objective evidence a lot of times is not maybe fully integrated into your final audit. Sometimes some of the objective evidence is just summarized. For example, I wouldn't put people's names in an audit report, under an observation, but I would have their those details in my audit notes that I'm going to keep or that I'm going to hand over to my audit client, point of contact or something like that. But you definitely want to have objective evidence to support whatever your finding is. Remember, your written observations are the starting point or inputs to actions for improvement or outputs there. And I've discussed that a few minutes ago. So here is another exercise. How can the following observation be written to better sell the finding to management? So here's an example. While auditing the shipping area, Josh was not following the work instructions for tagging material, ISO requirement. So, focus on a clear, take 5-10 minutes, focus on a clear statement of nonconformance, presenting a connection to the customer PPM for mixed parts, the impact on key performance indicators or process performance indicators, and connecting to specific internal procedures and a specific clause, not just ISO requirement. You want to rewrite that nonconformity statement to better define the problem. Okay, so remember the 4 key elements of a good nonconformity statement. You've got where's the requirement? What is it? Where did you make the observation, and what was the observation? Those four elements to a good nonconformity statement. So this is another real quick exercise that you can do yourself or with your audit team to, again, kind of calibrate and make sure everyone's on board in terms of what a good nonconformity statement looks like versus one that's not so great like this one. All right, and that concludes that module. We'll go on to closing and improving, kind of the final steps of closing out the audit cycle, and then looking for opportunities to improve your own auditing process in the next module.